Hi, so I'm Valerie Hartwich and I'm here with Andrew Kane. And this week we'll be chatting about relational dynamics. So basically the dynamics that happen within the context of a relationship. And specifically a relationship where one is caring for somebody. And whether that is professionally or actually on a personal level is equally important in this discussion. So we'll first be looking at what we mean by a relational dynamic, and then we'll be talking about what can happen, what kind of relational dynamics can happen, and what can happen depending on the kind of relational dynamics that we have between the two people and to each of the parties in question. And then we'll look at the telltale sign for this tends to be more of a relationship of that kind or more of a relationship of that kind, and then how we can address that. And I think first and foremost, we have to say that we tend to navigate somewhere in between the spectrum of dependency and empowerment, always in any relationship, but specifically in the caring context.
Yeah, and in a personal relationship, like there is a natural dependency. That's part of what it means to be in a relationship, is that attachment, isn't it? And it would be wrong to sort of make that go away. That's when you're with two individuals who aren't really sort of connected. So as you say, they're two natural parts of it, and we can be aware of when that's working in a healthy way, either personally or professionally, and when those perfectly natural things are beginning to jam things up and get us stuck.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to look at that question. If one is on a regular basis in a kind of caring capacity, because it has a great influence on how we do and how we process that relationship and what effect it has on us, but equally what effect it has on the person that we're in a relationship with. So as usual, it's a matter of being responsible and being kind and caring to ourselves and to the other, and then to actually take that question fully into our awareness. So should we first start and kind of address what we mean by that?
Yeah, sure. Mean by what exactly?
Relational dynamics.
Sorry?
Relational dynamics.
Yeah, okay. Do you want to say something, or shall I?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think it sounds quite complicated, but really it's quite simple. When two people come into relationship, as you said before, there is some level of dependency, because we come into a relationship because somebody brings us something that we don't necessarily have, and sometimes it's simply being in presence with somebody, like a bond. But sometimes it's also somebody has knowledge or somebody has an ability that one doesn't have. And the relational dynamics is really kind of the dynamics that the relationship has, so the kind of character that the relationship has. And it can be one that's very empowering, either one way, like a one-way street, or it can be two-way, or it can be a relationship that's very much a dependent or codependent relationship that kind of keeps the two people in place. And so the dynamics is really how the way we interact with the other person that feeds into the relationship, and how that kind of throw back and forth ends up creating gives a character to the relationship itself.
I think particularly in our context, we're interested in like kind of victim rescuer kind of dynamics. Is just a really common one for people who have a natural tendency to be caring and kind. That's the danger area, isn't it? Whether it's personally or professionally. I don't know if do you have Little Britain on TV in Germany, Valerie? No, but there's just a little sketch in that. There's two guys. One of them's in a wheelchair and the other one isn't. But they, like the one who isn't in the wheelchair, is sort of his carer. But you can tell, like they're both. The one in the wheelchair, he's just pretending. He actually can walk just fine. But they're both stuck in this dynamic of the one who's pretending to need the wheelchair wants to be looked after, and the one who's doing the looking after is just as kind of stuck in that. He can't handle it when the other guy stands up and moves around. He's like, no, you have to get back in your wheelchair because this is how this relationship works. And it's funny because there's a little model of what can happen sometimes when caring gets out of hand.
I think that that's a great example because it basically very clearly highlights the fact that even if you're the one who's taking care of the other, one always has the opportunity to either see the person separate from whatever circumstances or condition causes them to need care, or you confuse the person and the circumstances and the condition. And then what can happen, as you said, is that it very well could slip into you're not capable, you're incapable, and you're incapacitating the person, and you might be limiting the person, but equally you might be limiting yourself, because the more the person needs you, or the more that becomes the framework, the less autonomy you yourself have as well, because you are needed, and you are the greater the needs, the less ability for each of the parties to basically have a life outside of the caring relationship. And I think, for example, of the way that grandparents or elderly people used to be in society. They used to live with the family, and of course there are certain things they couldn't do anymore, but then they had another function. They partook in life in a different way, so they still brought something to the table. And whereas often today, not necessarily, but often, elderly people go into a care home and they are strictly in that capacity only receiver of care, mostly, unless the staff really has the time and capacity of receiving something. And that is very difficult on any human being. I regularly do some voluntary work with refugee women, and just being on the receiving end for a human being is actually a very dehumanizing thing. It feels very passive. It feels like it really restricts yourself. And actually the human being has a need to receive and to give. It's interesting to see where we navigate those relationships between empowerment and dependency.
Yeah, and particularly want to look out for, like, if you're a therapist, if you're a yoga teacher, you're in a setup where you are helping someone, looking after someone, to allow the space for their autonomy, because it's such a trap to be wanting to help so much that you end up accidentally slipping into that dynamic, and even without meaning to, disempowering the person who you're trying to help by doing too much for them and sending an unconscious message almost that you can't do this, so I'm going to do it for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's even trickier when you do this on a professional basis, because whether or not you acknowledge it, you have a need for clients or patients or students, right? This is your this is how you make your money.
Yeah.
So it could very easily turn into how unconsciously, potentially, how do I get people coming back? And there are two ways to get people to come back. Either they are really happy and they really are seeing a form of progress, and they just know that you're going to keep giving them tools that they can use in their own time when you're not there, so that the progress keeps kind of like inching or leaping its way forward. Or there's it felt great with me, and then when you're not with me, it doesn't feel great. And so the person keeps coming back because it's almost like they want their dose of sugar or whatever. And so it's something that very much happens when it's a professional caring dynamic, because there is a need on both ends, but actually generally only one person's power, and in that case the knowledge or the ability that that person attains, is acknowledged, whereas the power of the other person, because they're paying, is generally not really taken into account.
Yeah, and there's another need in there as well. You mentioned like a yoga teacher or a therapist, like they want to have recurring customers, as it were, like people coming back. there's another need there that's often hidden, which is like a need for approval from their clients. And of course, it's nice. We help someone, we feel good. That's brilliant. But when we are doing the work in order to get that approval, then that can start creating these unhelpful patterns. I slowly, accidentally start maneuvering someone into a position of being a victim whom we are helping, which doesn't help either of us in the long term. So we have to be really aware of, okay, it's nice that they're really pleased with the session or what I've done for them, but for ourselves not to get hooked on that praise, that appreciation, that approval.
Absolutely. And so I think I'm just going to quickly address what happens when we consciously or unconsciously create a dependent relationship, a codependent relationship. And this is valid for professional or for personal relationships. One, it basically means that we are limiting the person's potential for being a fully part of life and the process of recovery, if there's a process of recovery, or fully being a part of society, because they are seen as limited and they will enter into that role potentially. And it also means that we are potentially in the long run, if we do this professionally, this is mostly true if you do it professionally, but not only. If you enter in a caring relationship, not only do you want the other person to feel good, but eventually you want the person to, there is always a level of wanting the person to get better. And unless you really recognize that you are part and parcel of the reason why the person doesn't get better, you will get frustrated. And that frustration is something that builds up, that might eat into your confidence in helping somebody, or might just be something that sucks your energy. So it's really important to address these things.
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone wants to look at the Karpman drama triangle, it explains that really well, about how often a rescuer can get really frustrated and then turn into a persecutor and get really angry and frustrated with the person who they were initially supposed to help.
It's a slight irony that does unfortunately tend to happen.
Why aren't you better yet? Ah!
Should we have a little look at that the kind of telltale signs of this relationship is more skewed towards the dependent end? And a little disclaimer, these relationships, these caring relationships, are rarely perfectly symmetrical. They'll kind of fluctuate, or there'll be one specific tendency, but we can always aim at least giving some form of empowerment and a room within that relationship. So just that little disclaimer. So shall we look at what telltale signs one might pick up?
Yeah. Let me throw one in to begin with. As a therapist, I think the same would apply to yoga and like people who are helping with rehabilitation. It would be noticing that you're too hooked on either your client's progress or their feedback to you, like whether they're going, that was an amazing session or whatever. When your emotional reaction to that is too strong, and that's a sign that you're getting too attached to being in that particular role.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you start to take it too personally, and you could take success or failure personally, it doesn't really matter. But when you take it very personally, then it is about you, essentially. It's not about the relationship, and it's not about the goal that you've set with the person, or whatever it is that you're working towards.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be the key thing for me.
Key thing. I think there's there are another two for me. One is like one's relationship and one's reaction to the other person's expectation is another very big key. So, I have had plenty of students and patients in my capacity of a yoga teacher and a massage therapist who've come to me and they're like, this is what I want to achieve and this is what I expect, and I expect it to happen within that time frame. if I suddenly feel like I'm reacting in the, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to deliver or whatever, then I am definitely entering into this codependent relationship where the person's expectations, I'm not meeting them. I'm just being swallowed up by them. And the same can happen in reverse, or it can happen from the therapist to the client or the patient or whatever. So I think this is a very good telltale sign. When you're met with an expectation and you react to it, you have the right to say, to basically clearly define boundaries. This is what I know might happen. This is what I can suggest. This is what we can work towards, but this is possibly not realistic. So you have the right to set boundaries. And I think the other thing that I would say, and I always come back to that, is how do you feel physically in your body, but also emotionally during the time of being in this caring capacity and then afterwards. If your body is uncomfortable on a regular basis, if your body has like specific kinds of pains, and it's not because you sit, because of the way that your body is, or if you feel drained afterwards, that is also a telltale sign that this relationship is probably not as balanced as it could be.
Yeah. Do we move on to some tips then? Yeah,
happily.
I think a couple of things came up for me while we were chatting. You said something really useful before, that when you're in a caring capacity, it's easy to forget what you're receiving. Mm-hmm. And that, for example, if you're a yoga teacher or a therapist, one of the things you're receiving is probably money from the people who are paying you. Mm-hmm. And to consciously acknowledge where they are helping you can help rebalance things in your mind, so you don't slip into being the heroic rescuer. You go, hey, I'm helping them with their problem or their muscle pain or whatever it is. They're helping me buy my dinner for tonight and pay the rent and whatever else it is. And the second sort of tip I'd come back to is something that we talk about a lot, and we've talked about in another video, which is like your self-care, because the biggest danger, I think, of looking for approval and appreciation from our clients is when we're not really properly appreciating ourselves. So when you're hungry, when you're thirsty, that's when for emotionally hungry and thirsty, that's when the vulnerabilities come in. So coming back to look after yourself and give yourself your own feedback. Be your own judge about, well, hey, am I doing a good job here or not? Which might be the same as what your clients are saying or might not be. But just to start to keep that separation from being hooked on what your clients are saying and doing.
Mm-hmm. Those are good ones, to which I would simply add two things. Before you enter a brand new caring relationship, and before you enter a session or like a spending time with a person in a caring capacity, and we've said this before, take a little moment to check in on yourself. What are the drivers? What are the motivations for you doing it? And it's not about eliminating drivers that you think are not good or bad or selfish or whatever. It's about acknowledging them. And it's kind of like, if you've got a dirty window and the sun is shining outside, your window's dirty, it's going to still not look like it's terribly great weather outside. And so it's the same thing. If you know what the drivers are, you're more likely to know what might be pulling some strings in the background, what might be making you react in some ways. So that's the very first one that I would say. And then, once you know that, you can kind of slightly adapt and adjust how you behave. And then the second thing that I would say is something that I do as much as is possible within the frame of my work is, if I work with somebody on a regular basis, I always seek to give them small practical tools that they can use. And so it'll be a very simple movement that they can do on a regular basis, a very simple breathing exercise or something like a some tool that's very practical, very realistic to use in daily life, very simple. They don't need me. They just need to like have it ingrained for a little while, and then they can use it, because then it gives them a sense of like, oh yeah, I can do this. I can help myself when I'm not there, because you never know, I might move somewhere else, and I don't want to drop my patients or my students, you know, without anything to fall back to. And it also means that they can take themselves further, and our work can go further rather than just going back to like the same old stuff again and again and again. It's just much more enjoyable, to be quite honest.
Yeah. So helping people to help themselves.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Ultimately, that's what you want. And I think unless you're really dealing with very severe cases, even in the case of severe cases, I think you always want to try and give people a sense of being capable of at least having some measure of agency within the process.
And that's when helping turns into empowerment. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add?
I have nothing to add.
Wonderful. That's a good one. So Andrew, how can people get in touch with you if they're kind of keen on exploring that question with you, because they have like a good connection to you know how you are, how you come across?
Yeah, if do you want to say hello to me? If you find that you spend so much time and effort looking after other people that you never get around to looking after yourself, you can check out yourownbestfriend.co.uk, where I've got some materials on how you can be as kind to yourself as you are to others.
That's a nice title.
Thank you very much.
Very nice. And if you're interested in equally having a process with a therapist or a yoga teacher, a massage therapist with a psychosomatic approach, or a yoga teacher that is really geared at giving you very simple, realistic, nonsensical tools that you can use in daily life, and you want to look me up, then look up Valerie Hartwich online, or you can look up my website, which is resonanceexperience.com. Thank you very much, Andrew. As usual, a really fun chat.
Thank you. It's been great, Valerie.
Take care of yourself. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.